Bret, welcome to Boss Class.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm just going to give a little bio, which is you've been CTO of Facebook, co-CEO of Salesforce, you're the chair of OpenAI, and you're the co-founder of Sierra, which is a startup. But we're talking to you now because of your role in generative AI. My understanding is you weren't following this particularly closely, and then you had a kind of eureka moment. What was that?
I'm trying to remember the year. I want to say maybe 2022. Time is such a blur in the world of generative AI, but I was the co-CEO of Salesforce, and it was summer, and OpenAI, which was then a research lab very few people outside of Silicon Valley had heard of, released a demonstration of a product called Dolly. And it was a product that let you, with a prompt, generate an image, but at the time was incredibly novel. And one of their demonstrations was generating a picture of an avocado chair. And it was remarkable to me in so many ways. First, it was just the fact that it's somewhat reductive, but computers have been executors of rules, very quickly. And that's been what computers have done forever. And all of a sudden, you're doing the opposite. You're having a computer get creative and think of things you haven't thought of before. So not only was it a technical achievement that fascinated me, it actually challenged my perception of what computers were for. Started to think about what new inventions will be possible with this. That's the most exciting part of the generative AI to me is we've taken things that were impossible and we've made them easy. And now those are ingredients to almost an infinite number of recipes that we can now make.
Okay, and just to give people a sense of what Sierra is.
So at Sierra, we help companies make customer-facing AI agents. So when you call up a client, let's just say, Sonos, if you know the speaker company, or here in the United States, SiriusXM, rather than waiting on hold or press 2 for service, you'll actually talk to an AI agent. And the value proposition is really simple. I think if it were 1995, and I don't think we'd be podcasting, but if you could sort of imagine for a second, I'd be sitting here and telling you why every company needs a website. It will change your business, and I think it did for most companies. I think in 2025, every company needs an AI agent, and the vast majority of the digital interactions you'll have with your customers will be via your agent, and that agent's going to do everything your website can do.
Your firm has penetrated a large swathe of corporate America and beyond, but you also hear a lot of people expressing sort of frustration and disappointment. And you can choose your survey, but just anecdotally, we're in this sort of weird moment where you kind of like you teeter between hype and hope and disappointment and frustration. How do you explain that?
When a technology is new, whether it's the mainframe or the PC or eventually the advent of the internet, there's not a lot of off-the-shelf solutions to leverage that technology. So, when mainframes and PCs came out, a lot of companies had to build everything from scratch. And then the first generation of software companies essentially amortized the research and development costs of building that software across thousands or hundreds of thousands of clients, which is just rational. So you end up where, every company in the world built their own, and then you transition to, licensing software from these software vendors. And then the internet comes out. And there's an article in Wired, and it wasn't 2000 yet, so it's called 1997, 98, that time period. And it was about a set of banks that were spending between $20 and $50 million to make their websites transactional, which if you read the article, basically meant adding a login form so you could actually see your stuff and not just like information about the bank, which is something someone who goes to a coding boot camp could do in a weekend, or now with tools like Codex and Cloud Code, you could do just by prompting. But at the time, it was $40 million of consulting fees to just make this website work. And now, if you wanted to make an e-commerce storefront, you could go to Shopify and do it in less than an hour. What took $40 million, and this whole article was about how they spent all this money and weren't happy with the outcomes. We're roughly in that era of AI, and AI agents in particular, where everyone knows agents are going to have a big impact. If you think about onboarding a new vendor to your supply chain, you do that, hundreds of times a year if you're a consumer packaged goods company, an agent should be able to take that and make it lower cost, faster, more reliable. If you have a toll-free number for customer support, it stands to reason it's better your clients can talk to an AI agent rather than wait on hold, a route to a BPO, offshore somewhere. But right now, for a lot of use cases, there isn't an off-the-shelf solution. So you end up with a lot of people taking the raw component parts of AI, the models and agent building toolkits, and are trying to string it together. Some people can do it with success, some people won't. We're slowly but surely we're emerging with off-the-shelf solutions for some of the most important use cases in agents. Sierra, we're the leader in AI agents for customer experience and customer service. And there's a really neat company based here in San Francisco as well called Harvey that makes AI agents for the legal profession. So if you fast forward 4 or 5 years, I'm hopeful that for your listeners, for each of the use cases and each of the key departments, let's say auditing your financials after a quarter close, there's going to be an agent for that you can just buy. In the meantime, because there isn't, you'll have to build it yourself. And you'll have to go through this question of, do you want to incur that complexity and cost? And if you do, by the way, you should probably prep yourself. You're going to throw it out when a vendor is available, because most companies don't want to be software companies, right? Most companies just want the job done. So we're just in the early innings, and I'm hopeful 5 years from now, it'll be a very mature landscape of vendors who sell agents as solutions to problems rather than people selling models and saying, here's a bunch of wood, build a house, which is kind of the case for a lot of companies where they are today.
So to the extent that you have to worry still about hallucinations, is that still an issue? How do you handle things like security? So those sort of technological problems that people are still having to grapple with.
The models are imperfect, and actually, even more challenging, I would argue, is that models are non-deterministic. So you can give it the same prompt 2 times in a row and get 2 different answers. That makes testing and the concept of robustness very challenging, because you want to be able to say, will the model never do this? I'm not sure it's possible to say that. One thing I think is really important to remember, though, is people are imperfect as well. So if you think in financial services, one of the things that's a big no-no is a financial advisor promising returns, right? That's illegal in most countries and should be illegal in all countries because it's impossible to promise and obviously inappropriate. But people have done it. That's why there's all the regulations in place, right? And in fact, for a lot of banks, a lot of people record phone calls and have transcripts and have controls in place to inspect and say, did people do something wrong? I think that's actually a fairly healthy way to think about AI as well. If you stop waiting for it to be perfect and say it will be imperfect, do we have the technical and procedural controls in place to recognize when it is imperfect and remediate it? Have we put in guardrails in place to mitigate the risk? It can be a very constructive conversation. And I think the more narrow the use case, the easier it is to put in those guardrails. So if you're a retailer and you want to have an AI agent help return an item, well, that standard operating procedure is very concrete. We have a 30-day return policy. Has the item been worn? All those things. And there's some risk of hallucination, all that, but you've narrowed the use case. So I joke it goes from being a science problem to an engineering problem. And then as the technology matures, you can generalize more and more and more. But for labs like OpenAI working on AGI, that's a science problem. For a company, if you think about building an agent for a process, can you narrow the domain so it becomes an engineering problem? And you can put the controls in place so that when there are errors, you find them and remediate them.
So if you think about the edge cases in your own client base with Sierra, what is the frontier at this point? I mean, if we had a conversation with a bank which said, we can get comfortable with a kind of pretty set of sort of like binary and simple form filling activities. If you start to move into the advisory space, for example, it just gets way too reputationally complex and problematic for us. So where are we on the continuum? What's the art of the possible right now?
First, I've been really pleasantly surprised how much regulated industries have adopted AI agents so far. As you intuited, there are some conversations that are more complex than others. In the context of healthcare, scheduling an appointment with, say, an orthopedic specialist is relatively low risk because it's scheduling an appointment. Having an AI agent do a triage diagnosis of, perhaps which specialist you should talk to is much higher risk because there's, medical decision making there. And so I think a lot of people are saying, using an American baseball metaphor, getting some at-bats with, I think, some of the lower risk use cases, so that as the technology matures, and in particularly the regulatory landscape matures, they have deep experience with this technology so that they can evolve towards those more sensitive use cases. I think it will actually evolve more quickly than people expect because of I believe that AI, while it is imperfect, it is actually more consistent than humans. And so if you go back to giving financial advice, there's a ton of risk. AI can hallucinate. If anyone tells you there's no risk, they're selling you snake oil. However, if you look at a very large financial services firm and all of the communications they have with their clients, what percentage of those are imperfect? It's probably very high. Our expectations of human perfection are just much lower. And so we accept that AI can actually improve the robustness of controls. And I think that whether or not that's the commonly held belief now, I believe it will become that over the next few years.
One part of my brain is still trying to work out what an at-bat is, but we'll leave that. Just in terms of customer reactions, because you're kind of describing like people need to get to adjust to the idea of agents, of AI. Humans are fallible. This is better. But to what extent do customers of your customers know that they're talking to an AI, and how do they respond to it?
All of them do. All of the agents built on Sierra identify as an AI, say, hey, I'm an AI. And actually, most of them say, I occasionally make mistakes too, because it's important, I think, that, it's a trust building exercise, right? And the customer satisfaction scores of the AI agents built on Sierra are incredibly high and almost uniformly higher than the human interactions that preceded it. One of the favorite conversations that one of our clients sent me was for a telecommunications company, and it was an elderly man called because his receiver wasn't working, so he couldn't watch television, and spent more than 30 minutes on the phone talking to this AI, and ended with, "Thank you, you've been a good robot." And it was fascinating to me just because the degree of patience this AI had with someone who probably in these interactions would have encountered a much less patient person on the other side, just because of the inherent cost of staying on the phone with someone for that long. And just the empathetic gesture of thanking it. He was quite aware it was a bot. I think we'll be pleasantly surprised just because AI agents can speak your language literally. Here in California, there's English speakers, there's Mandarin speakers, there's Tagalog speakers, there's Vietnamese speakers. It's now free, effectively, or to provide multilingual service. Infinitely patient. There's no one behind you saying, "Hey, get off the phone. You have to do 10 more phone calls today to reach your quota," or whatever it might be. And can accommodate even idiosyncratic things. And it doesn't mean that it's better for everything. I don't mean to imply that, but my co-founder, Clay Bavor, has a great way of putting it, which is, for the history of computers, we've had to learn how to use computers, and you have to learn how to think of the first time you used Microsoft Excel, just how intimidating it was. AI agents learn you, and you just talk, and it figures it out for you. So I think it's a really humane, really positive evolution in the history of computers, going from punch cards to keyboards and mice to touch screens to now just speaking.
What about some of the hidden costs here? So, are there humans in the loop when people are interacting with your AI agent, and what does a handoff look like in practice?
There can be, and there should be in some circumstances, so there's, I'll just give you an example in like the mortgage industry. If you're refinancing a home or buying a home, some of it is the actual presentation of a mortgage, which probably should be done by a banker. But a big part of it is collecting information like your income and assets and credit. That's an example where an agent can just sort of augment an experience that you have with a banker. And the banker can spend less time on collecting forms and PDFs and actually just doing what he or she does best. I would say it should just be a business decision. Do you want the AI to sort of be a co-pilot, if you will, to a professional subject matter expert? Do you want it to be autonomous? Similarly, the client should add agency in that. If you want to talk to a real person, you should be able to. And I think the nice part about these AI agents, because they're good and they're not like the old bots that everyone hated, most people are opting into using them. So you can end up actually having, I'll say, higher quality, more expensive interactions with your people because you've essentially unlocked a bunch of budget by taking a lot of the simpler transactional stuff off with AI. We have one client who had offshored their customer service, who's now onshoring again, as an example, because the volumes have changed and they can afford it now, and they thought it would be a better experience. So it's like there can be some really interesting counterintuitive second order effects here.
But to the extent that models can still go wrong, you've got to have some method of monitoring. Is your contention that that can be another model, or how do you mitigate that risk?
I like to think of it as defense in depth, which is a term in tech circles we usually use around security. Most companies now have a chief information security officer. And what defense in depth means is first, you try to prevent anything from going wrong. So you lock all the doors and you make sure there's, good monitoring on everyone's laptop. But then you say, okay, if a bad actor does get in, can we detect it quickly and limit the blast radius? So that's where you end up with, in addition to locking all the doors, you put monitoring in and real-time monitoring. And you end up with all these layers so that even if one of the layers ended up with a vulnerability, you've mitigated it. I think the same should be true of AI. So I think the first layer should be AI monitoring the AI. At Sierra, we use a concept called supervisor models, and they essentially supervise the decision making of the underlying model in real time and say, is this a hallucination? Did they actually follow the standard operating procedures? Did they break one of the guardrails? And that's in real time. And then you can have a longer, more intense model thinking after the fact, which is essentially after the conversation is done, evaluating it. Was this a low sentiment conversation? Did the AI agent repeat itself too much? Things that you can sort of look at with the context of the full conversation, and then you can maybe put those conversations on a queue so people can review them after the fact. And what's really nice about that is rather than just looking at maybe a random sample of conversations, you put the needles at the top of the haystack, so the problematic ones are there. And the whole idea here is you use a combination of AI and humans in the loop, using AI to help those humans that are in the loop so that they're not just wasting their energy, but actually spending their time on the most sensitive, the most problematic conversations.
I also want to just talk about evaluation. So if you've, as a customer, as an enterprise, you're trying to build things for yourself and trying to define what good quality is, what performance is, that seems to cause people quite a lot of trouble. You're inside organizations helping customers through that process, as I understand it. So what are the kind of big problems that people hit and how should they resolve them?
This is going to sound reductive, but I think one of the most important things you can do as a business leader is specify a business outcome you're trying to drive more than a technical outcome. So I think it's really important when you think about your business processes where AI agents can apply. What are the key business metrics you actually care about? I'll just give you one that's simplistic, which is what percentage of calls can people don't need to talk to a real person, self-service resolution rate. Well, it's easy to make it 100%. You just don't let someone talk to a real person. And as you or any consumer knows, that can be an insanely frustrating experience. So that metric's just gameable. It's not a great metric on its own. Things like customer satisfaction score or net promoter score, coupled with a metric like that, are really productive because you tend to get a mix of consumer sentiment plus the sort of business outcome of how many of your clients could help themselves without having to wait in a queue.
And that feeds into your own pricing approach?
That's right. We do what's called outcomes-based pricing at Sierra, which means we only charge our clients when the AI agent actually solves the problem on behalf of the customer, and we have to escalate to a person, it's free. Our whole philosophy is that software, ancient history 4 years ago, software was, a productivity tool for a person. And if you asked a salesperson, was it your CRM system or you that drove that sale? Of course, they're going to take credit for it. Well, now in AI agents, if it's one of a Siri agents answering a phone call or answering a WhatsApp chat and handling a customer service inquiry, you know whether it solved the problem, and you also know the customer satisfaction score, and why not pay for a job well done rather than pay for the privilege of using the software?
So I want to just end by opening this out a little bit more into kind of where you think things are going. So you've described how in 5 years, say, the ecosystem for vendors will be that much more developed. You're in an interesting position where you've got feet in sort of two camps, right? You're with Sierra, you are one of those vendors, the application layer. You're also chair of OpenAI, one of the foundation models. If you take us forward 5 years, does the foundation model do everything? Is there a threat to your business at Sierra from a more competent Claude or ChatGPT?
It's the right question. I don't think so, or I wouldn't have started Sierra, but I'll give you the bull and bear case because I think it's a really important question, and certainly in the cocktail parties here in San Francisco, it's what everyone's talking about. And I'll sort of bring it down to like, why is everyone talking about it? One of the main things that these foundation models can do well is generate code to produce software. And if you haven't tried it, open ChatGPT or and ask it to write an app for you or a website, and it will, and it's pretty good. And so you look at that and you're like, wow, the marginal cost of producing software is going down dramatically, not to zero, but going down dramatically. What does that mean for the software industry? What is that? Does that, why would I license a piece of software, or can I just go to, an AI model and say, generate that software for me? And so, and we've for my entire career, there's been a shortage of software developers. It's the scarcest resource at most firms. And so no one knows what's going to happen. And because we've never lived in a world with an abundance of software, it's just always been the scarce resource. So it's a really important question to ask, and I think it's very important for a variety of industries. Not this is a software industry, but the consulting industry. Like the ramifications are dramatic, and as with anything so fundamental and so big, it's hard to actually predict the second and third order effects correctly. My personal opinion is that most companies don't want to build and maintain software. So even if the act of generating a piece of software goes down by a lot, you build it, you own it, And so I'll just take an ERP system as an example. And I can't remember the name of it, but there was a new accounting standard that came out for software companies called a decade ago. And it just changed the way you recognize revenue, particularly for subscription software businesses. And so being in, at Salesforce at the time, it was something that was a big deal for us. And if you imagine every single company has to go re-implement those accounting rules and just how significant it is, right? Like your auditor will care about it. Amortizing that cost among lots of similar looking companies feels really rational to me. And I'm not sure just the cost of writing software is actually what you're purchasing from your ERP vendor. You're almost purchasing the like audit that they've done and the checks that they've done and the, bugs that other clients found that they fixed. That essentially ecosystem of like collectively hardening that system that is so mission critical for you has innate value. So as a consequence, I believe that, companies still want to buy solutions to problems. They don't want to buy, software. And I think that will hopefully get higher leverage and higher altitude. My hypothesis is that you will buy agents that do purpose tasks. And, you might buy an agent that audits your financials every quarter. You might buy an agent that answers your customer service calls. You might buy an agent that generates leads for your sales teams. And there will be an ecosystem of companies that compete to produce the highest quality agents in those categories. So that's my hypothesis. But I say this with the humility that it is my industry, the software industry, is being disrupted as much as any other, perhaps more than any other, as a consequence of AI. And so, if we talk again in a year, I might have a different opinion, but that's my opinion right now.
So your vision is agents everywhere. Sierra's proposition is, I think fundamentally we can save you a lot of money on labor. I mean, that's presumably the kind of the big selling point. You can correct me if I'm wrong. What is your hypothesis on where humans continue to have an edge and what this means for jobs generally?
I'll do a small correction. I don't think our main value proposition is labor cost savings. I think our main value proposition is improving your sales and your relationships with your customers. So if you think about, say, a mobile operator, if you look at what drives their business, it's customer acquisition and churn, and if you talk to any large telco CEO, she will tell you that churn is actually the more insidious because once you spent all that money acquiring that customer, even a handful of basis points of churn reduction is worth a ton. And one of the main drivers of churn is customer experience, customer service. And so I think broadly, if you think about you have a budget for talking to your customers and you've made it so the cost per interaction goes down from 10 euros to 1 euro, just for argument's sake, you now have 10 times the budget for customer interactions. How much will you recoup in cost savings and how much will you invest back in reducing your churn or improving your CSAT or improving your NPS or driving more sales? So the thing I'll tell you is actually most of our clients are cost reductions are interesting, but I mean, most CEOs are hired and fired based on growth more than they are on that. But I do think your point on jobs, let's just broaden it. Certain jobs are going to be more capably done with an AI agent than a person, and that is has been true in the past. If you look at the birth of the automated teller machine, it changed the role of people in bank branches. So this happened many times. We went through the Industrial Revolution with globalization and sort of the birth of the services economy. Jobs have changed a lot. The premise I strongly disagree with, and again, I come at this with a lot of humility, is the idea of like jobs will go away and we'll have nothing to do. I just don't agree with that. I think actually we just lack the imagination to think about what jobs will be formed around this technology. The question, though, is just how quickly the technology evolves. My mom worked for a oil company for 30 years and went there after she got her MBA and retired there. And she didn't have to completely reskill every 5 years, right? It was a much slower pace of adoption. The electrification of the US and the UK took decades, and we're now have a technology where I'll just take my own profession, software engineering, where like what is the best practice today is completely different than it was 12 months ago. It is a challenging expectation for the individuals at your company to have to reskill that quickly. And I think it's happening for a lot of white collar jobs where that wasn't the expectation going in. So I think that's really challenging. I'll give you what I think is a really optimistic take on it, though, which is we're all in the same boat together. There's no software engineer here in the Sierra offices that's an expert in coding agents any more than any other software engineer because the technology is all new. I joke it's like we're all accountants and Microsoft Excel was invented last weekend. No one knows pivot tables yet, but if you're the one who learns it first, you're going to be like the best accountant on the block. And so I think it's intimidating, but with a kind of a beginner's mindset, I think the individuals at your firms that actually adopt this technology the best and most fluidly can actually accelerate their careers. And that's really interesting because there's not really there's no one on the outside you can bring in who's better than the people you already have. And that's very different compared to some of the other, I'll say, economic disruptions that have happened in the past. But it is challenging. I mean, imagine you're 58 years old, you're contemplating your retirement, and all of a sudden, the skills you've developed through your career when you're supposed to be in the prime of your career are not as relevant. That's a challenging situation to be in. So it's a disruptive time. And as I said, I think it's actually appropriate in some ways that the software industry is disrupting itself as much as any other industry because I can tell you the people working on it are having the same insecurities that we're talking about right now, and I find there's something appropriate about that. It's like everyone is experiencing this collectively, but I'm optimistic for the long term and mildly anxious for the short term is the short of it.
I guess the interesting thing is you're actually at the confluence of two things, right? Coding is right at the frontier of this and feels this apprehension. So does customer service is another good example. So I mean, you've sort of your advice to a software engineer is learn AI, get ahead of the group. What's your advice to a kind of like a calls center agent?
Well, It's interesting. One of our clients, the team that manages the call center now, their job title is AI architects, and they're working on the AI agents themselves. And I think, proves the principle that actually there's no expert in this, and the people who are, managing call centers are just as equipped, and in fact, deeply understand the customer experience, and they can manage AI agents as well. And I think for the individuals who are grappling with their own identity in this world, you might have to seek out opportunities in other departments, and be sort of savvy, just because if certain, types of interactions are going to be done by agents just because it's appropriate, what are the areas that my company is going to invest in? And you may need to sort of project, sort of position yourself for that. And that's challenging. I don't mean to minimize the complexity of that, but that's the way I'd think about it, because I think that's going to be the more complex thing: is cost savings in an area leads to investment in another area. As an individual employee, how do you sort of jockey for positions that you benefit from that investment?
Last question, if I may, and that's you described yourself as an ex-suit, and you must be running a ton of people right now at Sierra. So how has AI made you a better manager?
I love using AI as a creative foil. If I am writing a note on our strategy, I'll use ChatGPT to critique it and find flaws. I don't use it to write because I find the act of writing my process of thinking. And so I find generating content with it actually eliminates a key part of my my deliberative process. But I love it as a creative foil and a critique. Similarly, I do think it's a great productivity enhancement, whether it's Slack or email, having AI summarize things. It's hard to keep tabs on everything going on, and there's so much information that I didn't read before that now I can use AI to help me read as well. Those would be the two things that I think are remarkably useful tools.
Is there anything that it doesn't do yet that you wish it did? What's your own frustration?
Um, there's a lot, but I do hope there's a day when I'm driving in on my commute that I can be talking to an AI and triaging my email inbox. And I haven't quite found that email. It's that workflow, but it feels inevitable. You can see the progress in the technology almost daily. So I am more. It's more of like a matter of when than hoping it gets there.
Well, if you solve like holding on the line and email, then you're up for some kind of peace prize, I think. So, thank you so much, Bret. That was great to speak to you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.